Cooking had always been my escape, a way to unwind after a long day at the office. Almost every night, I'd whip up something fresh, which meant frequent grocery trips. Luckily, there was a Walmart just a mile from my apartment, and with their unbeatable prices, it became my go-to spot. For months, this routine was seamless. I'd swing by after work, grab a few fresh ingredients, and head home to cook dinner. But one evening, something changed, and it still gives me chills to think about how close I came to real danger. It all started so innocently. One afternoon, as I wandered through the produce section, an employee greeted me with a warm, "Hey, how's it going?" He was hard to miss, a big guy, bald, with a short, dark beard. I smiled politely and responded with a quick, "Good, thanks." I didn't think much of it. People were friendly at Walmart. But the next time I went, there he was again. Same spot, same greeting. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little flattered at first. I chalked it up to him just being outgoing. Maybe one of those employees who like to make small talk with everyone. But over the next couple of weeks, his questions started to feel more personal. Coming straight from work? Where do you live? What kind of job do you have? At first, I answered vaguely, thinking he was just making conversation. But as time went on, I started feeling uneasy. One evening, as I picked out some vegetables, he approached me again. He asked the usual questions, but this time, he got bold. "Hey," he said with a grin, "can I get your number?" I froze for a moment, taken aback. Politely, I told him no, explaining I didn't feel comfortable giving it out. His smile faded instantly. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his whole demeanor shifting. I brushed off the weird interaction and finished my shopping, but I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling. As I wheeled my cart out to the parking lot, I saw him again, this time, sitting in a car a few spaces away from mine. My stomach sank. Was he watching me? I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe he was on a break, or maybe he just finished his shift. But as I started my car and pulled out of the lot, my heart raced when I noticed his car pull out right after mine. Trying to stay calm, I told myself it was just a coincidence. But as I made my way toward my apartment, he followed me through every turn. By the time I reached my complex, I knew this wasn't random. He was trailing me. Panicking, I drove aimlessly through the parking lot, hoping he'd lose interest, but he didn't. His car followed my every move. Refusing to lead him to my building, I made a split-second decision to leave. I pulled out of the complex and onto a busier road, my mind racing. As I reached a major intersection, I spotted a gap in the traffic and darted out at the very last second, cutting off the car behind me. It wasn't the safest move, but it worked. His car had no chance to merge, and I lost him in the chaos of rush hour. Relieved but furious, I drove straight back to Walmart. I marched into customer service, demanding to speak to a manager. When I explained the situation, they looked stunned. "Nobody matching that description works here," one of them said. My stomach dropped. If he wasn't an employee, who was he? That's when it hit me. He must have been posing as a Walmart worker. Maybe he bought the vest online, or maybe he'd worked at Walmart in the past. Either way, he had been using that fake identity to gain my trust. The store promised to keep an eye out for him, but their reassurances felt hollow. When I finally made it home, I locked every door and window. I sat in my apartment, replaying everything in my head, wondering what his true intentions were. Was he planning to rob me? Kidnap me? I couldn't know for sure, but the thought of what might have happened still keeps me up some nights. How would you have handled the situation if you were in her shoes? What do you think his intentions were? And could this have been part of a larger scheme? Share your thoughts. It was just another quiet weeknight when I stopped by my local Walmart for some casual shopping. It wasn't particularly late, around 8 or 9 p.m., but the store was relatively empty, making it one of those peaceful trips where you can shop at your own pace. As I wandered into the fitness section, my attention was drawn to a massage gun on display. I'd been considering buying one for a while, so I stopped to read the box and check the features. That's when I heard it, a man's voice coming from the next aisle over, faint but distinct. At first, it was just background noise as I focused on the product in front of me. But then the words hit me like a jolt. "I'll buy you this toy if you come with me." My initial reaction was to assume it was just a parent bargaining with their child, but something about the tone didn't sit right. I couldn't hear the child's response, but then the man added, "Your mom said it's okay," followed by, "Come on, let's go." An unsettling feeling crept over me. What if this wasn't a parent? What if something was wrong? I tried to shake off the thought, convincing myself I was probably overreacting. But the nagging doubt wouldn't leave, so I decided to investigate. I walked over to the toy aisle and glanced down it, trying to appear casual. That's when I saw him. A man in a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little girl and leading her toward the end of the aisle. Both of their backs were turned to me. The girl didn't look distressed, but something about the situation felt off. Acting on impulse, I grabbed a random stuffed animal off the shelf and called out, "Excuse me." The man turned around, visibly startled. I walked toward him, holding up the toy and pretending to need advice. "Do you think this would be a good gift for my niece?" I asked. The man hesitated for a second before replying, "I have no idea." I kept the conversation going, trying to gauge the situation. "Is she your daughter?" I asked, nodding toward the girl. He quickly responded, "No, I'm just watching her for a moment, but we really need to get going." He started walking away with the girl before I could say anything else. I stood there, torn between my suspicion and the possibility that I was overthinking it. Maybe he was telling the truth, and I was just being paranoid. Trying to convince myself it was nothing, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. But barely 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name, "Sarah, Sarah." Her tone was urgent but controlled, enough to catch my attention. I immediately knew. My stomach dropped as I rushed toward the voice. I found a woman looking frantically down the aisles, her face filled with worry. "Is Sarah your daughter?" I asked, and she nodded, panic flashing in her eyes. I explained what I had just seen, and without a second thought, we both bolted toward the front of the store. When we reached the self-checkout area, there he was, the man with the little girl. He was holding a toy, preparing to scan it at the register. The mother screamed her daughter's name, and the little girl turned, breaking free and running toward her mom. The man tried to play it off, claiming he was just buying the girl a toy to be nice. But his story fell apart when he realized no one believed him. In a panic, he bolted for the exit, leaving the store and disappearing into the night. Security was called immediately, and thankfully, they were able to track him down not long after. Later, I learned the little girl had wandered off while her mom was shopping in another part of the store. It was an innocent mistake that nearly turned into a nightmare. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily the situation could have ended differently if no one had intervened. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have approached the man? Or would you have called for help instead? Let's talk about how we can look out for one another in public spaces, especially when children are involved. There's something unnervingly eerie about being in a nearly empty Walmart in the middle of the night, and after what happened to me, I've made sure to avoid those late-night trips ever since. This all took place back in 2014, when I worked a job with absolutely insane hours. Some nights, I wouldn't get off until well past midnight. On one particular shift, I didn't clock out until nearly 3 a.m. By the time I left work, I was exhausted, but my hunger was worse than my fatigue. I decided to stop at a 24-hour Walmart near my place. It wasn't like I had any other options. Most restaurants were closed, and I figured I'd just grab some snacks and drinks to get me through the night. The parking lot was mostly empty when I arrived, with a few scattered cars here and there, probably belonging to employees. I parked somewhere in the middle, grabbed my wallet, and headed inside. As expected, the store was nearly deserted. Aside from a couple of employees restocking shelves, the place was dead quiet. I wandered to the snack aisle and started scanning the shelves, trying to figure out what I was in the mood for. I've always been indecisive about food, so this was nothing new. As I stood there debating between chips and trail mix, I started to get this unsettling feeling, like someone was watching me. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the creepy ambience of being in a dimly lit Walmart at such a strange hour. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a figure standing at the far end of the aisle. I turned my head to get a better look. It was a tall, lanky guy in a black Adidas sweatshirt, just staring at me. He wasn't looking at the shelves or pretending to shop. He was looking directly at me. When he noticed I'd spotted him, He glanced away, but the whole thing felt off. I tried to shake it off and went back to scanning the shelves, telling myself he was probably just zoning out or something. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and moved to the next aisle, hoping to put some distance between us. But not even 10 seconds after I entered the next aisle, there he was again. He slowly peeked around the corner, his eyes locking onto mine before quickly disappearing again. That uneasy feeling in my gut was now undeniable. This guy wasn't just some random late-night shopper. I decided to test a theory and started walking aimlessly around the store. No matter where I went, the man followed, always keeping his distance but never losing sight of me. He didn't say anything, didn't try to approach, just silently tailed me like a shadow. By the time I reached the back corner of the store, I'd had enough. I turned down a main walkway, and sure enough, there he was again, standing there like he was waiting for me. I'd reached my limit. Forget whatever else I might have needed. I was done. I made a beeline for the checkout lanes, where only one register was open. I told the cashier about the man who had been following me, but her response was lukewarm at best. She just nodded and said it was strange, but she didn't seem too concerned. I just wanted to get home and put this whole weird experience behind me. After paying for my things, I quickly headed toward the exit, keeping my eyes peeled to make sure the guy wasn't nearby. When I stepped outside, the cool night air was a relief, but the parking lot was dim and eerily silent. I hurried to my car, glancing around every few seconds to make sure I wasn't being followed. As far as I could tell, the coast was clear. I unlocked my car, got inside, and started the engine. Just as I was about to put the car in gear, movement in my rearview mirror caught my attention. My heart dropped. Sprinting out of the Walmart doors, moving at full speed, was the same guy who had been following me inside. He wasn't jogging or casually walking. He was running like his life depended on it, straight toward my car. For a split second, I froze. It was like my brain couldn't fully process what I was seeing. Then, adrenaline kicked in. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. As I sped off, I glanced in my rearview mirror again. The man didn't stop. He chased after my car, running as fast as he could until I was out of the parking lot and onto the main road. Even after I was safely away, my mind raced with questions. Who was this guy? What did he want? And why was he following me in the first place? I never got any answers, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going back to Walmart at 3 a.m. ever again. What do you think this guy's intentions were? Was it just an attempted robbery, or could it have been something worse? What would you have done in this situation? Let's discuss. I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It was about 4 years ago, and I had just stopped by Walmart to pick up a few things. Back then, it was my go-to store. I practically lived there for groceries and essentials. It was nighttime, the store had a decent crowd, and I wasn't planning to be there long. Just a quick in-and-out trip for 2 or 3 items. But that night ended up being anything but routine. As I was browsing one of the aisles, a man suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't an employee, but he seemed oddly eager to strike up a conversation. He looked to be in his late 50s, about 5 feet 8 inches, with grayish hair. His approach was casual, but his demeanor felt off. He asked for my name and what I was shopping for. I answered politely, but something about him made me uneasy. After a minute of small talk, I told him I needed to get going and walked away, hoping that would be the end of it. But as I headed to the self-checkout area, there he was again. I hadn't even noticed him following me, but now it was obvious. Instead of using one of the empty registers, he walked right up to me and offered to pay for my items. I tried to keep things light, thanking him but firmly declining. I asked why he would want to do that, and he simply said he was just being nice. The interaction made my skin crawl, and I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Thankfully, after a moment, he walked off, but not to check out. Instead, he just left the store. Relieved, I finished my checkout and walked out to the parking lot. And guess who was waiting? Yep, the same guy. He greeted me again, startling me. Then he asked, out of nowhere, if I wanted to come over to his house. My heart raced. I gave a nervous laugh, apologized, and said no. As I started walking to my car, he followed me for a few steps before stopping. Thankfully, he didn't push further, and I drove home. Looking back, That encounter should have been enough to keep me away from that Walmart, but I brushed it off. Just a random creep, I told myself. I kept shopping there without incident until about a month later. That night, I was back at the same Walmart, shopping for groceries around 8 p.m. I had almost forgotten about the guy, but as I turned into one of the food aisles, there he was. The recognition hit me like a brick. At first, I couldn't place where I'd seen him before, but within seconds, it all came flooding back. My chest tightened. I needed to leave, and fast. I started walking away, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But just as I was making my way to another part of the store, I saw him look up, and he noticed me. He didn't say anything, but his eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel the tension in the air. I hurried to the opposite end of the store, abandoning my grocery list entirely. I wandered into the quieter, less crowded sections, hoping he wouldn't follow. But as I turned down another aisle, I spotted him again, walking in my direction. Panic set in. I set down my basket, filled with everything I'd intended to buy, and made a beeline for the exit. I didn't care about the groceries anymore. I just needed to get out of there. I walked as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint and made it to my car. Only when I was safely inside, doors locked and engine running, did I let out the breath I'd been holding. That night, I decided I couldn't go back to that Walmart again. It was just too risky. I never saw that man again, and I can't say for certain if it was a coincidence that we ran into each other twice, or if he was waiting for me that second time. Either way, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and left when I did. Have you ever felt unsafe in a public place like a store? What would you have done if you were in this situation? Would you have confronted the man? Or would you have left just like I did? A couple of years ago, I worked the overnight shift at a Walmart. It was a straightforward job, stocking shelves after the store closed. My shift usually started at 9 p.m., and the store stayed open for customers until 11 p.m. Even during those hours, it was rarely crowded, so the nights were mostly quiet with just a few employees working. One night, I was assigned to restock the pet supplies aisle, which was located at the back of the store. By 11:30 p.m., the store had been closed for about half an hour. I liked to work with my headphones in, listening to music to help pass the time. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. While stocking shelves, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like someone walking past the end of the aisle. I glanced up but didn't see anyone, thinking it was just a coworker. I shrugged it off and continued working. A few minutes later, I saw movement again, but this time, the figure stopped briefly at the end of the aisle before disappearing into the next one. That's when I realized it wasn't one of my coworkers. It was a man I didn't recognize. Curiosity and caution kicked in. I removed my headphones, walked to the end of the aisle, and looked into the next one. I spotted the man again, but he quickly moved to another aisle. His behavior was strange enough that I radioed my coworkers, letting them know I thought someone who didn't belong might still be in the store. Then I returned to work, trying to shake off the uneasiness. An hour later, I went to the back room to grab some supplies. The back room was large, and at that moment, I was alone. As I walked through, I noticed something unusual. The same man was crouched behind a large box, partially hidden under one of the shelves. My heart dropped. I didn't stop walking, pretending I hadn't seen him, and made my way toward the exit to the sales floor. As I was about to leave, I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. My instincts took over, and I started running. I burst through the door back into the store and didn't stop until I found Al, one of my coworkers working in electronics. I told him what had happened, and he agreed to come back to the stockroom with me to check it out. We cautiously entered the back room together. Almost immediately, we heard the sound of another door slamming shut. It was one of the emergency exits that led outside, doors we rarely used. We rushed toward it, just in time to see the man slipping out into the night. By the time we got to the door, he was gone. The whole situation was baffling. How had he gotten into the store without anyone noticing? My best guess is that he'd hidden somewhere before closing time and stayed behind intentionally. Even more chilling was the question of why he was there. What had he planned to do while lurking in the back room? Was he waiting for an opportunity to harm someone? Or was it something else entirely? I never saw the man again, but the incident left me uneasy. Not long after, I quit that job. Looking back, I wonder if I narrowly escaped something far worse. What do you think his intentions were? And have you ever experienced something unsettling like this in a place you thought was safe?